Totally understood. Sometimes real life just happens, and
sometimes real life does just happen.
That's more important. So,
well,
yes.
Your time is important too, but we are recording, so boom.
Okay. All right. Should we jump on? Do you think we should go ahead and go? I see people
are still. I'm going to admit right here. Boom.
Popping in.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's see. I don't think we have anybody. Well, we still have two. So we've got a couple of staff, but I sent them a message that are in another Teams link. So maybe we can go ahead and start since we're already a little bit behind, and I'll try messaging them again.
Okay, perfect.
All right, thank you, Beth.
Yeah, no, thanks, y'all. Thanks everybody for your patience. And again, technical glitches happen and real life happens, and real life really does sometimes just have to be more important. So
thank you for that. And for anyone that misses anything, we'll have the recording.
We will. It will be fine. All right. So, and it's the third day anyway. Y'all have already done 2 days of this. So much of this is going to be just so familiar anyway. And the first several slides, in fact, that we're going through really are essentially repeats, just to reframe for everybody what we're, oh, I have to tell y'all, I just somehow, this happens in Teams every now and again. I'm losing vision of everybody if I go into full screen, which drives me crazy. So I'm going to try to do it like this, but if it's too hard for anybody to see, just shout and let me know. The conversation today is the third of the 3 Fidelity scales, and it's a mouthful. And there's a lot on the scale itself that's a mouthful. I'm going to warn you of that up front, but it's called the Consultative Employment Training and Supports Fidelity Scale. Or if you really want to do a tongue twister, you can do the CETSFS. But this one hits the period of time that we spend on site with people after the job has begun. So it's the period of time that historically has been called job coaching, right? And the idea with the name change is to really better reflect what it is that we're doing when we're on site in these customized employment scenarios. The idea with this and the target with it is to really ensure that everything that has been identified during discovery and then capitalized on in terms of customizing and negotiating this job that seems like a really good fit for the person and for the business, that we give that every possible shot of success. Right. So this is the idea that we're coming in and we're following up everything that we've done to date. And now the rubber truly hits the road, so to speak, because it's day one on the job. And I will say that I think this conversation and this Fidelity scale is particularly important, because if there is any place where we do tend to see a reversion to standard operating practices, it's in this job coaching phase. And the reality is that if we're not carrying through on everything that we've learned and built, we can undermine all of that really good effort, and we can undermine it at the time where it actually matters the very most. I always throw out there when I'm talking about the job coaching and consultative employment supports phase, that somehow in our hierarchical system that we really like to have, we have come up with this idea that job development is at the top and discovery or the support around that is in the middle, and that job coaching is the least supported, the least paid, the least, and the least respected, frankly, a lot in terms of the way that we view employment services. And I like to throw out there that I think this is by far the most complex and the most important of the 3 phases. So I think really need to recognize the legitimacy and the importance of the work that is occurring when people are on site with the employer, with the new employee, and trying to figure out how do we really support this to not just ensure that the individual learns how to do their job, but how do we really support it so that they become a fabric of the company and they become a part of the company culture, a part of the company family. And you'll notice in this scale that that's what we're trying to hit on, and that's where we're going with this. If you were on the first day and the second day, I said that we've been doing sort of a staged rollout of these Fidelity scales. This one, the CETSFS, is the newest of the 3. it has the least amount of research around it thus far. So if we get the NIDLR Fidelity grant this fall, we'll be pulling this up and doing the Delphi study and the other research that we've done on the first 2 scales with this one, and then doing the field testing. Even if we don't get that funding, if the RSA grants come through, which they probably will in the next month or so, all of this will be a part of that research process. So just understand that this is the newest of the 3. What that means is that the core components that we talked through today, the focus areas, are not going to change. What may change is the wording and the criteria. That may be refined as we go through the process, because that's a very typical component of the work that we do with the research. I've already talked through those 2. This one has 7 systems tenants, 7 services tenants, and then again, the systems tenants are universal. They're rated for the state as a whole. They look at things like funding. They look at things like ensuring that there is the ability to support the transition to long-term supports between 2 funding streams, and the designation of the employment specialist who's going to be providing the on-site support services. And again, the systems tenants are there just to really recognize that employment service providers and employment specialists don't exist in a vacuum. They exist within systems. And so the systems have to be supporting best practice CE in order for us to be able to truly expect that the providers are going to be able to deliver best practice CE. The 7 services tenants are the ones that we'll walk through today. And those identify the actual components of delivering this phase of CE service. Once again, rating scale, exactly the same as we've talked about for the last 2 days. So there's an unacceptable score, a -1. If any part of -1 is true, the entire score is a -1. On the plus side, we have acceptable, good, exemplary. Julie and I just did a DFSTA review this morning and really went through again this idea that anything on the plus side is good. So we don't want people getting a +1 and feeling like they're failing, right? The idea is if you're on the plus side of the scale, you are delivering Fidelity services, but then you can improve upon those. And the scoring on that side of the chart is cumulative. So in order to get the good, you have to meet all of the criteria for acceptable and all of the criteria for good. To get the exemplary, you have to meet all of the criteria for all 3, right? So it's essentially a +1, +1, +1. And again, good, better, best, striving for excellence, I think, is the way that we really look at that side of the scale. I did a little bit different format on this time, so hopefully this will be okay for everybody. Can y'all see the slide okay? Is that large enough to see? Okay. The first one is using and promoting customary training. So one of the big distinctions between consultative employment training and supports and more traditional job coaching services is that in the CETS and the CE approach, it is the company who does all of the training of the new employee. So the job coach is there, or the employment specialist in this case, is there to support the company and to support the new employee. But we're really relying on the personnel of the company itself to do the training, the orientation, the onboarding, all of the things that they would do with any other new employee. So on the unacceptable side of this tenet is if the employment specialist or the job coach is essentially the primary or the sole trainer and that they just teach the way they teach. I always find that we did some trainings in Michigan several years ago, and there was a video that was done of an informational, it was actually a discovery activity with a young woman named Megan and Jody, who was a baker, and they were doing baking. And it was a great, great, great example of, I think, so much of what we talk about in this scale, because they were baking a crumb cake, and there are many different ways that you can measure flour for a crumb cake, right? But Jody has a very specific way that she wants to do that. She wants to move the flour around, sift it around, then scoop it into a cup, level the cup, and then she doesn't want to weigh it. That's how she wants to ensure that she's getting 3 consistent cups in that. And so when we're talking about the customary ways of the business, and you'll hear us talk about that several times throughout this presentation, the idea is that we're really doing training in line with the way that company does things and works. So an unacceptable would be, I come in and I teach Megan how to measure the flour, however I think is the best way to meet it. And I'm not really paying attention to what it is the company does. So if I'm the primary trainer, or if I'm demanding that the company teach the way I think they should teach versus us trying to figure out how do we support them to teach the way they always teach, that's unacceptable. To get to the acceptable side, the coworker or the trainer, you'll hear us use different language on this, and all of it can be awkward. I think some of the oldest texts on it talk about the natural trainer. But again, whoever it is, whoever that person is that's responsible for training in that company, is going to be the primary trainer. And the plan then is for them to use their standard training processes to do what they typically do. All of this should be detailed in that consultative employment training and support plan. Remember, that was created at the end of job development. So all of this should be detailed in that plan. And then the employment specialist is just there to support as needed, right? To do even better, what we want to make sure is that the employment specialist, when they are supporting, when they're offering support, that they're doing it in ways that aren't just generalized, but really work for that particular person. And again, you can see where this links back to discovery, because it's in discovery that we had the opportunity to do activities and new things with people. And a part of what we're learning there is, how do they learn? What's the best way to support them when they're learning something new? So this employment specialist should have really good information and knowledge of how best to support that particular person. And under good, we have respecting and presuming the competence of the new employee, but really that is across everything, that everything we're doing, everything that involves teaching, everything that involves feedback, everything that involves interacting with the personnel in the company and this new employee always respects the dignity and the autonomy of that individual person. And it feels like that would be something that we wouldn't have to hit in the scale and we wouldn't have to say, but it is astonishing how many times employment specialists feel like they're there to represent the company and not the person. And they will get onto the person, or they will talk down to the new employee because they're feeling pressure from the company to do something differently. And we have to make sure that that never happens. And then exemplary on this is, as training is beginning to unfold, if we need to be doing modifications or improving it, that's not just something that the employment specialist is coming up with on their own, but they're really actively working with the coworkers and the new employee to begin to figure out, what do we need to do differently, right? Because again, all of this needs to be baked into the way that the company is learning how to support the person. So we need to really be doing that in tandem with them and not just telling them what to do. The second one is built around fostering authentic support. And again, I think some of my descriptions here are kind of mouthfuls, so we may refine the wording over this. But the idea with this is that our job in this phase is not just to teach the person how to do the job, or to support the company to teach the person how to do the job. Our job is really to help do whatever we need to do to ensure that this new employee becomes a part of that company. And we talked about yesterday that need to have connection with our coworkers, right? And be a part of a company and a culture that really fits, where we really feel like we belong. And I think historically, the way job coaching was provided, we would go in and we would focus on teaching people how to do jobs. And then we would sort of try to build the supports in behind us, right? So we'd go in and we'd interrupt everything, and then we try to piece it back together as we were fading our way out. And it just never worked very well. So this part of the Fidelity scale is really identifying up front and center that a core element of this process is making sure that you're facilitating those connections, that has to be happening. So anytime we see the employment specialist being the primary point of contact or the go-between between any company personnel and the new employee, that's unacceptable. We have to understand that the primary relationships that are being built and established and supported are the relationships between the company personnel and the new employee. And we're just there to be a piece of that however we can. So on the acceptable side of this, instead of having it be that communication comes to the employment specialist and then they're handling it from there, instead, the employment specialist is ensuring that the direct communication is always between the coworkers and the new employee. And that they're then supporting that. If there's any support that's needed around that communication, they're there to do that, but that the point of contact is for those two people. And then the other thing that we're really looking for is opportunities to connect with other coworkers throughout the workday. And this probably sounds familiar because we talked about it some yesterday. And again, the idea is that this is something that should be being incorporated into that consultative employment training and supports plan from the get-go, that we're not just looking at how do we ensure somebody learns how to do the job, but we're really looking at the company as a whole and what is it going to take to ensure that the person has the opportunity to really connect and fit. To get to a good, we want to make sure that not only are we teaching and ensuring that the person learns the technical aspects of how to do the job, but they're also really learning some of those other unwritten rules of the workplace. And those can be personal connections, those can be related to the work, right? Those can be the shortcuts that all employees take when the boss isn't looking, that we want to make sure that people get access to that so that it doesn't always appear that they are the slowest person doing the job when they're the only one doing it right and not cutting the corners, right? If everybody else knows how to cut corners. But also just things about being a part of the company in general. So it may be that there are, there's a birthday collection that's taken up every month, or there are balloons that are brought in, or there's a company that likes to do practical jokes and play jokes on each other. I mean, it can be any millions of things, but it's really looking at what are the pieces that make this company, and how are people interacting there, and how do we ensure that this person has the chance to really be a part of that. To get to exemplary, we're not just looking for this within the work environment, but we're really trying to make sure that the new employee has opportunities to connect with these coworkers outside of work as well. And I think it was it Tasha that was asking yesterday about how do we control for things that aren't really in our control, right? I mean, obviously you can't be there necessarily to make sure that the person is going to the baseball game on the third Sunday of the month. But these are absolutely conversations you can be partaking in while you're at the workplace and learning about, making sure that you're having those communications with the other support team members, right? I'm guessing all of y'all have seen situations where we go in and we do job coaching and we leave, and it's sort of like the person is over here alone and the company's all around them, but they're just not really a part of it. And that's really what we're trying to get at and get away from here. Any questions or comments or thoughts on those first two? Russell, Julie, anybody? Russell's not on his computer.
I was going to say, this maybe is a little bit of a question. And how could we help someone clarify this, perhaps, if we're giving feedback? But I know that in my work, I have, my company has worked with a lot of people who need support and need ongoing support to with communication. Maybe they don't use the phone or a computer at all, or communicate verbally, and they don't necessarily have strong natural supports. And so sometimes, we've had an employment professional who's available long-term, right? So they're going to be there, funded by the waiver or whatever it is, to check in and make sure things are going okay. And so sometimes they're needed to assist more with that communication and longer term building those relationships. how, like, what suggestions would you have for people that run into that? Like if they're doing supported, really supported customized employment for somebody, that, acknowledges the efforts toward establishing that those relationships that aren't dependent on the employment specialist, but that the employment specialist may be involved longer, just due to some of the support needs.
Sure, and I will say this is the part here is really that the initial training phase, right? Because this will end then with that transition to the long-term supports. And so I think, and I don't know whether this is exactly what you're getting at, Julie, or not, but I mean, the level of and the intensity of the support that's required is always going to be individually determined, right? And so it doesn't necessarily mean any of this building authentic support and natural supports doesn't necessarily mean that there won't be a need for long-term supports, or there may not be a time where somebody needs to get more involved again, right? Something else is happening, or there's been a scenario and a change in life and somebody needs to come back in and spend more time. I think all of that is still a possibility. But the question here, I think, would be really how do we ensure, like if somebody doesn't communicate verbally, but we know that everybody does communicate, right? So how are we making sure that the coworkers really understand the communication that is coming? And how do we make sure that the person and the coworkers have the opportunity to interact inside of that? And then if there's additional support needed beyond that, in particular situations, I think that's just fine. But again, the idea is how are we doing this? Is it the kind of thing where, I keep using baseball just because it's a really simple example. It's not anything that I know anything about, but if the employment seeker is a big baseball fan, or and there's somebody else in the company who is, or if they both love to grow, I've got a big eggplant growing right now, if there's gardening going on and there's a connection there, is the person bringing in a picture to just go over and share with somebody? Like, how are we making sure that there is an opportunity for the new employee to really become a real person, right? And have real natural interactions around that in whatever form they take.
Yep, thank you.
Does that, I don't know, yeah.
That's helpful.
All right. The next one, 2.3, gets at when we have to support. So the idea with consultative employment training and supports is essentially that we're defaulting to the natural teaching and the natural training, right? That we're letting what the company typically does be what the company does in this scenario as well. And there's again a big logic to that, in that we want the coworkers and the new employee to know how to interact with each other and how to support each other. And that's going to happen most effectively if that starts right from the get-go. But to Julie's point, really, there are going to be times where people may need some additional support to learn how to do things or to handle situations. And so in those moments, then the consultative employment specialist or the employment specialist is really intervening to provide the support. And so this tenant is providing the criteria and the guidance around what that looks like. So we're still relying on the primary trainer to be, or the natural trainer to be, the primary trainer. If the employment specialist just steps in and takes over and kicks the natural people to the side, that is unacceptable, right? If it's Megan's having trouble learning how to scoop the flour, the natural trainer taught her twice, we're just bumping the natural trainer to the side saying, I've got this, I'll teach her how to do this, and we'll reconnect with you when it's done, right? That's unacceptable. Or if we're, again, relying on teaching the way we think it should be taught versus really trying to integrate what's being taught with the way the business does things, that's unacceptable. To be on the plus side of this, what we see is this very fluid process and this very by the minute process where that employment specialist is just stepping in and providing support when and where it's needed and getting back out the second the learning seems to be occurring, right? So we are not taking over, we're not elbowing anybody out of the way, but you're watching and you're making sure, you know, if the learning just doesn't seem to be happening, or if people are getting frustrated or people are getting stressed, that's an enormous opportunity for this employment specialist to get in and help figure out, okay, here's what we need to do. We're going to break the step down a little bit further. We're going to focus on teaching this. As soon as she starts to get it, I'm back out. Natural trainers coming back in, right? And so that fading, that stepping in, the fading begins as soon as we have indication that learning is occurring and the situation is moving forward. To get into the good side of this, when you're doing this, the employment specialist is really using the instructional strategies and low technology, high technology, anything that again aligns with how we know that person learns best and how that person is best supported as we determine during discovery. So it's not just that we're using systematic instruction and specialized teaching strategies, but we're really using those adapted for that particular person and their learning style, right? Really simple examples of this are, you know, some people don't, the errorless learning is a really effective strategy, but for some people, if you interrupt them when they're doing something, that's going to cause them a lot of stress, right? For some people, it's better not to interrupt. For other people, it's better to jump in. All of this stuff is the kind of stuff that we should have been learning during discovery. And if any of that technology, even phone, pictures, whatever it is, if that helps, that we're figuring out how to embed that. Exemplary on this is if teaching issues arise, and they absolutely will, that it's not just the employment specialist relying on systematic instruction and specialized teaching to brainstorm what we do, but that we're incorporating, we're bringing the company into that, right? And we're brainstorming with them so that they can come up with some ideas for what we might try too. Anybody have thoughts on why it would be important to be pulling the company into identifying the solutions?
Well, it needs to be something sustainable once the support from the consultant is done. It needs to be something that the company can continue to do.
Yeah, and I think it really increases buy-in. You know, people are so much more likely to do something when it's their idea, when they've come up with it, when they think, let's try this, than they are when I tell them to do something, even if they're not trying to be resistant, right? You just get more buy-in. And they also have so much more knowledge of what goes on in their company and how they can possibly handle something than we necessarily would have. I know we are going to be so short on time today, but Russell, I'm wondering if you want to just talk a little bit about the person who there was an interaction with the coworker. This really actually gets at not the teaching, but the workplace challenges. But anyway, it's okay. And just what the company came up with as the solution versus the what we might have suggested.
The interaction, like the person had a difficult interaction.
Yeah.
With it, yeah. So there were a number of things that happened. But the one that so we were getting things that were like solutions that were kind of brought up out external, were things like well, so that, and it's a long story if we had more time, but it was nothing discriminatory or anything like that. It was just two personalities that seemed like didn't get along, and the supported employee hadn't been in a work setting, and so the need really in a long time, and so being around people that weren't family or paid staff, right? People you may not get along with right away was a new skill, or a skill that had gone unused for a while, right? That he was developing. So the ideas that came up from people, not the CE staff, but others, were, somebody has to go talk to the owner of this company. It's like 100, it's not a huge company, but it's a small, it's the owner's not there every day. He's doing other stuff. Right now, we got to go talk to him. Or somebody needs to talk to her, like us, to tell her how to talk with him correctly. Or maybe they can't work together, like ever. So we'd have to figure out some system of, like, when she's in the room, he's got to be pulled out. And then the one that was brought up by the case manager was he has to have 100% support forever to make sure, so all these, like, and they're pretty complicated, right? But what actually had happened and we learned about it later. So that happened, and then like the next day or the next 2 days, then the person kind of had apologized to the supporter, the customized the employment seeker. Clearly, she felt bad about it in terms of how she was kind of interacting very demurely, or just kind of she very differently, very deferential, in a good way, not a. And so the customized employment staff went and talked to the foreman, and the foreman's like, yeah, and this is part of the learning, is that like, she's awesome. Like, we love her for what she does, right? She was on a track maybe to be a supervisor, but she just, like, he's not the first person to have an issue with her. Like, all of us do, right? She'll say something real bluntly. She's like to the point. That's why she's not a manager. That's why she's not around people. She's doing the job, and she's not a supervisor. She's just a coworker. But she knows what to do. So like, if somebody needs help, she's been there 15 years, so she's going to be the one to help them. It's just they rub them the wrong way. So basically what they had done without our knowledge was they learned about, because the support employee had a good relationship with the foreman. So he went without us and went and talked to the foreman. And the foreman, it was very informal, outside of any official like HR process. Basically, they put her in a task that she didn't like for like 2 days, and told her, basically they kind of punished her, and let her know that this is why, and that they've got to find a way to get along. And so they basically, and it was almost told as an aside, like we were like, oh, things are fixed, like Larry, and I was like, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you, here's what we did, and so there've been a number of circumstances like that where things happen, and like we try to, like, we'll have meetings or brainstorm and like, oh, think. But then somebody there in the workplace, like in that case, a manager, or somebody else had some ideas on pieces that would follow the floor, how to, if you get dirt on your clothes, just things they've had problems solved for that before, and gave us ideas there. So was that what you were talking about, Beth?
Yeah, that's perfect.
I've shared that story a lot lately, where just the idea here, I think for me, is often that it's not that people don't need supports and that they won't need supports, but it's that I think you had said this, Beth, that you're kind of tapping and this may be a bit heady, or not more too theoretical, but like the environment has its own ecosystem, right? Its own checks and balances, and its own way to solve its own problem within most situations. There are extreme ones, I'm sure, that it wouldn't work, so the idea is you want to, when we impose something, or we try to come up with a great idea, and it's without trying to tap into what's already, like, we can really screw things up. To the extent where, like, somebody was like, there was actual possible solution that he would have somebody with him all the time, and he definitely didn't need that support, or that, like, or that if she's in the room, like, he's got to go. And can you imagine trying to work that out with the business, and how that would stigmatize him, as opposed to viewing it as something of, well, it's two people and relationships and figuring out how to work together. And so they kind of solve that, and again, it's not solve it always forever, things will happen, but I think the idea is, over time, right, people learn what works, and it's not us that are always initiating it or solving the problem, because like the idea is that's hard to sustain.
Yeah. I think that's just it. And you can see where, just even in that example, how the beginning pieces that we've been talking about are important too, because you see how beautifully the workplace solved its own problem, which is what really needs to happen, right? While we're there and when we're gone, we need the workplace to be able to be empowered to solve their own issues in ways that really support everybody. But that wouldn't have happened if there wasn't a relationship between the new employee and the foreman and the other people, right? That only comes because there are these connections that have been established and that are really being built. So I think all of these pieces come together to really, again, support that environment as a whole to do what they need to do. And this one is more talking about learning how to do tasks. The next one is responding to workplace challenges. And truly that's the example that Russell just talked through, right? That this is these things that are going to happen in a workplace that we know that they are. And so the idea with this tenet is to say that we're going to work at looking for proactive, universal, workplace culturally appropriate strategies that really align with that new employee's preferences, conditions, communication. And we're going to do all of this in ways that really maximize their engagement, right? And their ability to effectively respond to what happens in the workplace. That is a big mouthful. What this is in stark contrast to is putting somebody on a behavior plan, which is how we have historically looked at things. When there's a problem in the workplace, we say things like, well, I mean, these things still happen. He's not going to get to watch his television program when he goes home tonight because he did that wrong. Or we're going to sit them down and wag our finger in their face and lecture them. And these are not strategies. These are not pathways that any of us would use with ourselves or with other coworkers, right? And so the idea is that a lot of the challenges that we see in the workplace are not disability related. A lot of the challenges that we see in the workplace are workplace challenges. They're things that all of us go through, not getting along with a coworker, having tasks on our list that we don't love how to do, right? All of us have those things. And so we need to be able to design strategies that really support that. It may be that the way that the frustration or the annoyance is communicated is influenced by the disability, but it's not a disability related issue, and it doesn't require a disability related intervention. It requires a workplace related support, right? And that's what this is really trying to get at. So anytime you see like an approach to a challenge in the workplace, like being off task or talking too much with coworkers or not performing something the way they're supposed to, and you see a response that has to do with increasing coaching, reducing or eliminating work hours, minimizing interactions, using strategies that are punitive in nature or that don't promote this universality, dignity, or respect is unacceptable. On the plus side of that, what we want to look at is we want to look at what's really happening, and we want to think about what are the kind of strategies that any of us would use in the workplace, right? So if there are things that tasks that really aren't getting done, you know, one of the things that a lot of us do is we schedule the tasks that we don't like at a certain time of day, or we schedule them to be followed by something that we like. You know, so looking at the work schedule, looking at the work routine, looking at who people are working with. All of these things that are more, again, these universal strategies that we should really be looking to. And all of these on the plus side of this, so that we're then incorporating these to effectively address some of the more common workplace issues proactively. So things like, what are we going to do when somebody has a bad morning? What are we going to do when somebody has something that they don't really want to do? We're really designing things on the plus one side to really maximize motivation. And then when we get to this plus two, we're then we're tweaking that if there are challenges that are arising. And the third thing I think is just the plus three is that we are always reframing any of these workplace challenges in ways that really help the coworkers connect to, again, the universality of what's going on, and not seeing this as a disability related or a personality related type of thing, right? But there was somebody that I worked with once that if you came and you put papers down on her desk, she would go and throw her head down on her desk, right? She didn't want to do any more filing. She was tired of filing. And like some people thought that was super inappropriate. And it's not a common response to workplace stuff, but it is a common reaction inside, right? I mean, it's the way we all feel like when more work is piling on us and we've had a long day, right? So just making sure that we're really connecting with that and not regarding these as things from the outside. So there's a great question, and I'm so sorry that we're going to be so pressed for time. So inappropriate behaviors that could get the person in trouble if it is a disability related issue. I would still say, and again, not knowing any of the details, actually, you know what, Teresa, give me just a little bit more so I have a better understanding of what you're asking about.
The customer has, and Russell knows this guy, but
Beth and I'm sorry. We've talked a little bit about it, Beth.
Okay.
Just somebody who a person may make comments that could be interpreted the wrong way, and the response could be pretty extreme.
Yeah. If it was your normal coworker, if one of my coworkers was to do that, the natural consequence that would be for all of us is we would be fired, perhaps even get a charge against us. So with this guy who has skills, you know, we're looking at their environmental conditions and trying to minimize, you know, set them up to success, but there's still, you know, we may still have to look at, you know, how do we protect him from himself? Because this is not something he really seems to be able to control.
So he's saying things that could get him in trouble.
Saying things and showing videos on his phone. I mean, you could take his phone away, I suppose, but the question, yeah, it's saying things that, you know, in a natural environment, if any of the coworkers, any place said that to somebody, there would be an issue.
Yeah, and I think again, without obviously that's I could do hours on this conversation. I love this conversation because I think it is so important. But what I would say is I worked with somebody once, and I mean, some of the things that came out of her mouth were jaw-dropping. And I said to people when we were doing job development, one of the things they needed to know was that she doesn't have a filter. And I mean, she really doesn't. She just doesn't have a filter. And so she is going to say what she thinks when she thinks it, and that's what's going to happen. So one of the things that we really did in terms of trying, and again, I think it's instead of looking at how do we react to a problem, it's looking at how are we designing the supports around what we know is going to be a challenge for that person from the start, right? Because if we could punish it out of somebody, the system already would have punished it out of them, right? This is not something that's going to respond to or go away just because people say you shouldn't do that, right? Or even any of the other negative things that people have done. So the first thing I would say is that some of this is in the proactive design of the workplace. And again, that's what this acceptable is really trying to get at. This is going to go back to customized job development, that we're not developing a job in a place where that won't be tolerated. So if we're in an environment where that is going to result in immediate issues and immediate termination, or even start the trek towards termination, that's not the right fit for that person, right?
Well,
and there are some work environments where the languaging and what people say is really different than what the languaging and what people say within an office environment are. So we're looking for a company that can understand more what's happening and understand that it's not just a question of someone willfully disobeying cultural norms, but that this is just a piece of the disability and this is a piece of what needs to be accommodated.
So, but just to get your take on this, since we're dealing with this challenge, but if it's a sexually inappropriate behavior and it comes across as sexual harassment, I mean, I know construction work sites, guys work site, language, all of that, that I get, but even those places have certain boundaries when it comes to sexually inappropriate behaviors and or harassment kinds of things. And how, the thing is, you want him, we know he can succeed, but I also don't want him to end up on the sexual offenders registry.
No, and I mean, the reality is, and again, we're gonna have to bump this. I would love to have this conversation. We just are gonna have to actually have the conversation, right? Like where we can schedule a time to really talk it through. But this is something I personally have dealt with multiple times over the last 30 years, just when I was doing employment specialist work, right? This is not uncommon. It's not the norm, but it's not uncommon. There are people who they don't understand the same level of why this is a problem because of the disability. And so what we don't want to see is that shuts them off completely from world and life. And it may mean that 90% of the companies out there are going to be crossed off our list, but there still are companies out there that can tolerate and support this. One of the guys that we worked with got fired several times because he was working in an environment where he interacted with customers. And one of the things that we know is that there's a lot less control over if you say something or do something inappropriate with a customer, right? It's just going to result in a level of action. So we knew from the get-go with him, when we were talking about ideal conditions of employment, that it had to be in a company that was separate, that wasn't involving customer interactions, where we really could have the conversations with the people in the company to set it up from the get-go and make sure we knew it could be supported. So I don't believe there's ever an automatic write-off. I think we can all acknowledge that there are some situations that are more complex than others, right? I mean, that's the reality of it, and that this one is a more complicated situation. But I do think there are still possibilities inside of it. And I'm going to go back to so much of it in this case is that proactive design. it's not waiting for the problem to happen. It's the proactive design and the planning around it. Yeah, I think is our safest bet and our best safety net on it.
Hey, Beth.
Yeah.
Beth and all, this is Lisa, and I know that we lost about 10 minutes with the tech challenges. If you all are able, I am happy to stay on a little longer so you can finish.
You are beautiful. And here is my challenge, is that this is possibly the first time in a while, but I have another training that starts in 6 minutes. But Russell,
Okay.
would you do me a favor? Would you text Molly and ask her if I was 10 minutes late, if that would be okay? Thank you. Okay. All right. And we'll just keep rolling. And Teresa and Russell, we can set up a whole other, I mean, really happy to have these conversations and do some planning. I think that would be fun and important. Okay, 2.5 hits reasonable accommodations. And this is really looking at reasonable accommodations is certainly a much broader term that encompasses a lot, but this is really looking at changes to the customary and ordinary work processes, right? So what we're saying is that we're really going in and we're defaulting to how the company does things. What are the company's standard operating procedures? And so in some cases, though, what we're going to discover is that even with the best teaching and the best communication and the best natural supports, that some people are just not going to be able to do all of the different things that we had originally negotiated in the job, or they're going to need some different level of support with that. So if we're making changes, there are a couple of things that are the sort of the rules of thumb. Number one, that all of these accommodations or shifts to the way things are being done in conjunction with the business. So unacceptable is the employment specialist makes this determination and changes things on their own. All of this has to be done with the support of the business. On the plus side of it, the employment specialist, and it doesn't say it here, but the employment seeker and the coworkers, all of them are negotiating changes to these sort of standard operating procedures or the way things are being done, only if the best teaching has been tried and it's been proven insufficient. So we're not going in and modifying jobs. We're not going in and taking things out of job descriptions willy-nilly, right? We're doing the best teaching, we're doing the best supports, and we're only shifting when we know data has shown us, okay, that we've got to do something differently here. On the good side of that, that's going to apply when we're doing job duties, schedule changes, or any other broader modifications. And again, that's only happening when we know the teaching strategies have been sufficient or insufficient, like we've been unsuccessful doing that. And then on the plus side, or plus 3, we're making sure that any of the changes that we're making really protect always, we keep talking about the dignity of the employee, right? Respect and dignity of the employee, but also that they really protect and enhance future stability and integrity of the job. So we're not pulling things out that reduce people's hours, that reduce their time on the company, that reduce their ability to actually get in there and be a part of the company, right? So we're making the changes only if it's needed, number one. We're only changing what needs to be changed, and we're ensuring that anything that we're changing really does still maintain future opportunities and the particular job. The next one hits this transition. So what we recognize is that there is going to be a transition between the on-site services and the on-site support phase, and then the long-term support piece, right? And I think, Julie, this was a piece of what you were getting into as well, or just the different components of this and the level of support that's needed. But MRS or BSBP at some point are going to close the case, and somebody else is going to be providing or funding the long-term support, right? So what we need to know is that there's a collaboration and a coordination between the employment specialist, the coworkers, the new employee when this shift is about to happen, right? And so that we're really dictating, we're designing a fading plan that makes sense based on all of this. So an unacceptable on this is if the fading plan and the timelines are dictated by anything other than the person and their learning and the stability and the natural supports being built within the workplace. So if there's ever a standard, we provide 20 hours of job coaching and then we fade, that's unacceptable, right? So the idea is the fading begins to kick in when somebody has really met the work performance standards and those natural workplace supports we know are in place. So on the acceptable side, we're going to start this fading process as soon as the data indicates that we're in place. So it's the opposite of unacceptable, right? So as soon as we know the person has mastered the core components of the job and we feel confident that that communication and the coworker interactions and the ability to respond to your typical day-to-day challenges or scenarios, that's solid, right? That's the point at which we begin to start to fade. That we're working on the +2 side with the company to make sure that if there are ongoing support needs that go beyond what the company typically provides to employees, that we've come up with strategies for meeting those needs. And that could include things like technology, that could include pairing tasks differently so that people have the opportunity to work with somebody or alongside somebody. But we're really making sure that we are getting something in place so that when we start to fade, it's not going to fall apart, right? So anything that the person is still really relying on us for, we're looking for what is the long-term solution? What's the difference? Where are we going to with us? And the +3, and I think this one is a really, really powerful one, is that we have, as the fading is occurring and before that there is somebody within the company that really has become that new employee's go-to person. So the one that they know they can really trust, they really have a connection with, and that we're actively involving that go-to person in this fading plan, right? So that we know things are, oh, all these people bumping off, okay. Julie, yes, join Molly, that would be great. So we've got somebody in there that's really, again, we're fading our support to ultimately whoever's going to be the long-term support person. But what we know is that that long-term support person isn't going to be on site 100% of the time, right? That's not ever the goal. So we've got somebody in the company who's beginning to emerge as that, here's where I go if there's an issue. And we're really making sure that we're building that as we're fading. The final thing is just to say that this ongoing support strategy and this fading to that long-term personnel is renegotiated and is redesigned based on what we've learned as we're doing the training. So this is really just saying that this support strategy is something that's being updated and modified. It's a living, breathing, growing process, and we're ensuring that different people are involved in doing it and supporting it. So the initial support strategy, if we just do exactly what we said we were going to do, and we're not modifying it and we're not adapting it, we're just living into the letter of the law of what we wrote 3 months ago, is unacceptable. The acceptable is saying that we're updating this and renegotiating this, and we're also paying attention to what are we going to be doing to address things like a work-related change, a financial change, if something happens in the employee's life, like the death of a loved one or somebody important moves or a staff member leaves, that there is a component for this ongoing long-term support strategy that says we know when to reactivate and bring additional supports in, right? So again, it's more this idea of proactive instead of waiting for a problem to happen, waiting for the company to call and say there's an issue. But we're really looking at where are the areas that we know somebody may need more support. And that we're building that around not just, again, what are we going to do if there's some kind of a change in the life of the person or a change in the job duties, but also what are we going to do if there are changes in leadership within the company or with coworkers at the company. And again, making sure that this plan incorporates strategies for that so that we have the communication protocol lined up so that the company knows to reach out to the long-term support personnel or provider if the owner's leaving, or if the foreman that the person's so connected to is leaving, or their go-to person is leaving. We need to be planning for these things and have a process in place that we don't just wait again for the problem to occur or for things to start to blow up. And I think the biggest thing is that we recognize that a part of what should be, this is the exemplary +3, but a part of what should be coming out of all of this process, if we're doing it well, is that the workplace itself, that company ecosystem, that company environment, and the people within it are better and better able to respond to the needs and address changes themselves internally. So we're really building their competence, and we're really building their understanding of how they most effectively support this particular person. And that's a part of this ongoing support plan as well, that it's not just dependent upon being able to reach out and contact the long-term liaison support or provider, whatever you call the long-term piece in Michigan, but that there's real competency built within the company itself as we're going. And that's a key piece of what this long-term ongoing support structure looks like. That's it for the 7 tenets on the consultative employment training and supports. I know we had one really, really great conversation with Teresa around some of the complexities of supporting people who communicate and behave differently at times in the workplace. But are there any other questions or comments about any of this? If we do this piece well, and we build this on everything that we've done before with discovery and customized job development, I think this is where we actually really start to see the return on the investment in terms of the time and the money and the system has invested and the people and the employee. We really start to see that return with these much more secure, stable, longer term, successful jobs, that we're not getting job coaches called back in, problems happening, you need to come back, we're reducing the hours, just all of the things that we end up spending so much time on the back end. I think this is where the true payoff comes for us as professionals in the system, but most importantly, for the person in their life, right? Where they start to really see their, not just their work life grow, but then their personal connections and their connections overall grow as a result of it. I think that's it. Lisa, you've got the recording going, right? So we'll clean up, clean up whatever we need to clean up. This will be there if y'all need it. And then anybody who is ultimately going to become a Fidelity trainer, I'll look forward to seeing y'all or a Fidelity administrator. I'll look forward to seeing y'all in the future sessions as you learn more about how to actually score these things.
Awesome. Thank you guys very much. And thank you, Beth, for staying on a little longer.
Yeah. And thanks everybody for your flexibility today. Yep. Appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.